Welcome back to FarleyCon. Chip Hazard here with Dan Jolley. Dan, how's it going today?
It's good. It's good. It's been a good show.
Good. Appreciate you taking a little bit of time for this interview. Got a couple questions for you. See, you got some novels, but you also do comic art, correct?
I'm not an artist. I'm a writer.
Writer. I'm sorry. That's right. A writer. Yeah.
Strictly a writer.
Strictly a writer. Yeah. Pardon me. I don't know. I think I personally attested all to the same, but it is different, correct?
Yeah. What I do in comics is write scripts. So basically, how a comic story originates, the writer comes up with the idea and then breaks that idea down into individual pages, and then those pages into individual panels. So, like, I would write, like, if we were a comic story, it would be panel 1, establishing shot of FarleyCon, which is taking place at the Camp Jordan Arena. So there'd be like a shot of the outside of the building. Panel 2, establishing shot of the creator's alley here. And then maybe by panel 3, we get to the three of us, and that might be described as like a 3-shot of the cameraman, the interviewer, the writer standing behind a table. And then below that, then we get into, like, we have interviewer, so Dan, are you a comic writer or a comic artist? And then writer, whatever the response to that would be. So you break all that down, and it's kind of like a series of instructions or explanations to the artist. So sometimes people like to write scripts that don't include the dialogue at first. Okay. But I like to include the dialogue so that the artist can allow room for it. If there's a particularly wordy panel, maybe the figures will be smaller because you don't want to cover up the art with the words. Comics is a visual medium. It's vitally important to let the artist populate the panels with the images of the story. If you had word balloons covering everything up, you might as well just write a novel.
All right. So when working on comic books, do you prefer superhero comics or fantasy comics or what?
I don't know that I have a real preference.
A few moments later.
Oh, superhero or fantasy?
Yeah, superhero, fantasy.
I mean, I don't know that I have a real preference. It depends on what the story is, who the characters are. How many restrictions are placed on the story. I like it best when someone says, what kind of story would you like to tell, Dan? The one that springs to mind, I wrote an issue of Vampirella many, many years ago, and it was at a convention. I was talking to Maureen McTeague, the editor. Okay. And she was like, well, we have space coming up that you could do something for. And just off the top of my head, I was like, well, have you done a story where she deals with a banshee? And she goes, no, we don't. We haven't had that. Pitch me a story involving a banshee. And now I didn't have a story involving a banshee. That was just the first thing that popped into my head. But then I got to go home and come up with something. And what I eventually came up with, I was pretty happy with. That's more enjoyable than if the editor says, write this Batman story where he has to be in this place and he has to deal with this character and this character, but you have to allow for these other stories that are going on at the same time, and or like the ones where the status quo absolutely cannot change. So you have to start and end basically with the same place, and that feels more like filler. So it's not as fulfilling.
Understandable. When dealing with comics and you write the script and everything, how closely do you work with the artists and illustrators and everything to make your story come to life?
As closely as possible. Ideally, before I start on the script, I'll call the artist or the art team and be like, what kind of preferences do you have as far as panel count? Is there anything that you really enjoy drawing? Is there anything that you hate drawing? And if somebody says, I really hate drawing cars, I will not write a scene in a used car lot. But a lot of the time, I don't know who the artist is going to be.
Right.
Sometimes I get an assignment and write the script, and 12 months later, the editor decides who is going to draw it. So then I have no input. So, you just kind of cross your fingers and hope for the best. Typically, I try not to have more than 5 panels on a page. I usually try not to draw horses. Apparently to write horses into the script, because apparently drawing horses is really difficult. Then that's a generalization. But, if you're trying to make it so that the artist who's eventually assigned to it doesn't hate you, you try not to write 18 panels on a page, because not everyone is George Perez. George Perez could draw 24 panels on a page and make it all gorgeous, but that's rare.
Right. So, last thing for you today. We don't want to take up too much of your time, but tell us about your novels, what you have coming out, what's your most recent, and what maybe are you working on that is not out yet but coming out.
Well, I write in a number of different genres. Like the Grey Widow trilogy is like science fiction, superhero, horror. And that came about because I had been writing superhero comic books for so many years, with a lot of the restrictions that I was mentioning earlier.
Right.
And I wanted to just write it the way I wanted to write it. So that's what came out. The Storm is a mystery thriller, like nothing supernatural or science fiction about it at all. That was inspired by a tornado that hit my hometown in 2011.
Oh, wow.
So that was a complete departure from writing science fiction or fantasy. That was like depicting the real world, which was a whole different ballgame, but it was great. And most recently, I've started a fantasy detective series.
Okay.
It's in an original setting. There's an all-human empire that has used rune-based magic to solve crimes for 300 years. Something begins to break that magic down, and it falls to the first ever non-human member of the Imperial Criminal Investigation Ministry, which is her. She has to come in and introduce actual detective procedures for the first time in like 12 generations. Maybe keep the empire from crumbling. Some people would say it's a bad habit to mix genres, but it just occurred to me one day, like I had never seen a high fantasy mystery.
No, I don't think I've ever heard of one.
And I went to John Hartness at Falstaff. Falstaff was publishing all my other adult fiction, and I said, "How would you feel about can I pitch you a high fantasy, like detective mystery story?" And Hartness goes, "Oh yeah, Stuart Jaffe has 3 of those coming out next summer. Yours can come out after his." I'm like, Jaffe. I thought I was really original, but the reception for the whole series is called the Demon Sleuth Scrolls.
Okay.
Because the main character is part of a race of people that the humans call demons, and it's like a racial slur. The actual species is called the Sethids, Setyd, Sethid.
Okay.
But the main character is forced to essentially become a reluctant hero, like a reluctant detective. And so it's like sword fights and magic and monsters and a murder mystery. And one of my favorite protagonists that I've ever come up with. So I'm really proud of the whole series. Book 2 just came out.
Okay.
In fact, this weekend is the first time I'm selling the books in person.
Oh, nice.
And I'm eyeball deep in book 3. So that should be out around this time next year if all goes according to plan.
Awesome. And for anybody who would want to purchase any of your novels, where can they get that?
They are all on Amazon. Everything is on Amazon. The Grey Widow novels are on Audible as well. They all have audiobooks. We're currently recording the audiobook for book 1, which is called The Rune Master Homicide, for the Demon Sleuth Scrolls. And I am in the process of negotiating a deal to have The Storm narrated as well. So by this time next year, everything should be on audio, as well as print and digital, like ebook copies.
Awesome. Well, Dan, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.